Committee this afternoon. Those that are joining us in the building, myself and Peter Weir, MLA, along with the committee staff, and also those who are joining us on Starleaf. We have Gemma Dolan, Sinead Bradley, we have Sinead Ennis and Rachel Wood, so you're all welcome. Just to advise members that they are welcome to use the mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode, and all devices are muted. This includes members' tablet devices, and they can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Members are obliged to declare any financial or other relevant interests which might be reasonably thought by others to influence our approach to the matter under consideration. And any members who have interests to declare in relation to today's business should do so, or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. Due to the length of the recent plenary sittings and the additional sittings, 3 oral evidence sessions on the draft budget will not be recorded by Hansard, so that's for members to note. Item Agenda 1, apologies. I have an apology from Doug Beattie, Robin Newton and Emma Rogan, and Peter has to leave us after 3 o'clock.
No, I can't stay on to 4 now.
All right, okay, thank you. Gemma Dolan, Rachel Woods and Sinead Bradley and Sinead Ennis are joining us by Starleaf. Just to advise members that if any have indicated they have delegated authority to vote on their behalf as provided for by Standing Order 115, Emma has delegated her vote to the Deputy Chair, Sinead Ennis. Robin Newton has delegated his vote to myself, and if necessary, Peter has also delegated his vote to me should he leave the meeting before it's concluded.
Don't let the power go to your head, Chair.
No, I've never had that many votes in my hand before, so I just need to. Agenda item 2, the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January. You'll find that, members, at pages 6 to 16 of the meeting pack of the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January. Are members content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting held on the 27th of January 2022? Agreed? Agenda item 3, matters arising. Correspondence from KRNI, comments on the committee's amendment to clause 16 of the Justice, Sexual Offences and Trafficking Victims Bill. You'll find that correspondence at pages 18 to 29 of the meeting pack in relation to the correspondence from KRNI. They've raised a couple of points on the committee's amendment to clause 16 relating to the support for victims of trafficking. The Law Centre NI, who worked with organisations supporting victims as part of the Migration Justice Project, has also put out a statement welcoming the committee's amendments. The committee's discussions with departmental officials, deliberations on this area of the bill and the text of the amendments are contained in the committee's report, which was agreed at last week's meeting and will be going out to all the stakeholders, including KRNI, in the next couple of days. This should provide clarification of the current legislative position and the committee's amendments. And would ask members to note the correspondence unless there's any other comment. Item 2. The Rtia Report on the care and supervision units in Northern Ireland's prisons. The Minister of Justice, as we know, made an oral statement to the House in relation to the Rtia Report in the operation of care and supervision units in the Northern Ireland Prison Service. A copy of the press release, the key facts document and the report is at pages 3 to 94 of the table pack. Arrangements are being made to hold a joint evidence session with the Health Committee on the responses from the Department of Justice and the Department of Health to the RQIA report of the review of the services for vulnerable persons detained in Northern Ireland's prisons, and that's scheduled for Thursday the 24th of February from 1 to 2:30 p.m. in the Senate chamber. The committee has also agreed to schedule a briefing on the role of the Independent Monitoring Board in relation to the CSUs following the publication of the Rtia Report and to consider the findings of the report. There are currently no oral evidence sessions scheduled for our meeting on the 17th of February. Therefore, the representatives of the Independent Monitoring Board could be invited to attend on that date. And it's just to seek members' views on whether you want the Chief Inspector to attend to discuss her report and the Prison Service officials to attend, and if so, should all the sessions be organised for the 17th. There's already an oral evidence session scheduled for the 24th of February, and the meeting will start. And our meeting won't start until 2:30 on that day, to provide time for the joint meeting with the Health Committee, so that the next available date after the 17th will be Thursday, the 3rd of March. So are we content? And there has been intimated to me via the Director of Prisons that he is happy also to arrange a visit for members to the CSU at a time. Again, we'll run into this difficulty as to when that could be scheduled. The only caution that I would put down is that we have the Director General present here today, but I am conscious that we have two other organisations here who want to brief us in relation to the budget. So if we could keep that in mind, then that might keep us focused on the issue of the budget. It's not to take away of the importance of the issue of the Rtia Report, but it is something that we will give attention to, if you agree, for us to do a separate oral presentation from Rtia and from the Independent Monitoring Board and from the Prison Service. Peter and then Rachel.
Yeah, just very briefly. No, I think a couple of things. I think the 17th makes sense. I think also the what you're saying in relation to the prison service, to the draft budget side of things. I think the way just probably to handle that, if members were in agreement on it, so that I suppose nobody is then wondering why we've got the prison service in front of us and the issue isn't being raised. If maybe in the initial introduction, when you're saying, and today we'll be focusing on the budget, there will be a further, and just put that on the public record.
Okay. Rachel?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think that all makes sense. It would be good to have everybody sort of not in the same room, as it were, but a sort of session dedicated to this has been rumbling on for a very long time now. It's been raised constantly since, sort of the start of the committee. I have very serious concerns, as I've said before, and in the chamber just about this. I appreciate what has been done and also the difficulties around this, but this report was asked for, the review was asked for to try and prove that there wasn't any issues, and we clearly see that there are issues, and I would absolutely, I know that there's two separate issues here in terms of the RQIA report with health, but this report does also feed in to the RQIA report because it does mention the CSU. So I would happy to have everybody sort of in the same day and have a whole session kind of dedicated to that in terms of oral briefings if members would be in agreement.
Okay, agreed members as to how we'll, and I'll preface on the basis of the comments that Peter has made, the reason or the rationale as to why we're dealing with it in the way that we're going to deal with it today. Thank you. Agenda item 4, the draft Department of Justice 2022-2025 budget. Oral evidence sessions, and that brings us to the first of the sessions today in relation to the budget, and officials from the Probation Board are attending the meeting in person to discuss the draft Department of Justice 2022-25 budget and its impact on the board. The relevant papers for members are at page 31 to 39 of the meeting pack, and can I welcome to the meeting this afternoon the Chair of the Probation Board, Dale Ashford, Amanda Stewart, the Chief Executive of the Probation Board, and Paul King, Head of Finance and Estates. We welcome you all to the meeting. It's good to see Amanda here today. Amanda and I have known each other in previous lives, and it's good, and you're very welcome. And obviously, it's your first time at the committee in your new role, so we will we'll have no really difficult questions for you, so you can be at ease. But you are very welcome.
That's very
Amanda, maybe if you want, because this is a very serious issue, because we are concerned, and maybe I can say this at the outset. We share the concern of all the organisations who have corresponded with us or who have contacted us about the impact And I know it's easy for politicians to use those phrases, and sometimes they can become, or they can sound very trite, but there are real people here who will be adversely affected, and services will be disrupted as a result should this budget stay as it is. But Amanda, you're very welcome, you and your colleagues, and if you want to take a few minutes to outline the key issues in relation to the Probation Board's view on this particular draft budget.
Chair, thank you very much. Just at the outset, I'm going to ask the Chair just to say a few introductory comments, and I think he's going to hand over to me, if that's okay.
Dale?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for having the opportunity to come today and to provide you with an update on the impact of the Department's draft budget for 2022 to 25 on the Probation Board. We hope that this session will help inform the Committee's response to that draft budget. As you've already mentioned, I'm joined by Amanda Stewart, who's our Chief Executive, and also Paul King, who's our Head of Finance and Estates. With your permission, I'll give a very brief overview, and then I'll ask Amanda to provide some details around the issues and the challenges that we see ahead of us. Firstly, I want to say that the Board have been working with the Department of Justice, and we've provided detailed information to the Department on what we see as the very significant impact that a further reduction to our budget will have on our ability to deliver key services to communities in Northern Ireland. As we set out in the paper to the Committee, PB&I received additional allocations in 21-22 that have not been accounted for. So this means that PB&I core funding is starting from a position of 5.3% lower than our final allocation for 21-22. And obviously there'll also be inflationary pressures as well that we'll be aware of, which obviously impact too. We know that the Department fully understands the impact of further reductions will have on probation. In their evidence last month, Justice officials said that this draft budget will have a direct impact on vulnerable groups and victims and will have increased downstream costs for the justice system. The Probation Board strongly agrees with this analysis. Probation's baseline budget is currently around 18.5 million, which is less than 2% of the Department's entire budget. But any reduction or cut in our resources is greatly magnified and has a disproportionate impact on staff and service delivery. Probation is also operating in an environment where we've already had to make significant adjustments due to years of austerity. In particular, the budget cuts between 2014 and 19 presented huge challenges to PB&I. As a result of those very significant reductions, we've already closed 1/3 of our estate, we've reduced back office costs to a minimum, and we've restructured the organisation to prioritise frontline service delivery and public safety. As a board which is representative of the community and which works in the heart of local communities, we are concerned that any further budget reductions will have a detrimental bearing on our work and inevitably make communities less safe. The board understands that following 2 years of a pandemic, the Executive's desire to prioritise health in the budget. It is, however, critical to note that probation, perhaps more so than any other justice organisation, delivers services which support good mental health, good physical health, and provide early intervention to people before they become entrenched in the justice system. Services that we provide to tackle addictions and poor mental health are now at risk, and the result will be that more people will end up having to use health services, particularly acute health services, thereby simply creating further pressure on our already stretched health system. Amanda will talk about the workforce and the workload pressures currently faced by staff, and some of that was highlighted in the 2020 report by the Criminal Justice Inspectorate. The board are very much alive to the fact that any further budget reduction will potentially have a detrimental effect. Our people have worked incredibly hard over the last 2 years. We have a duty to them to ensure that we can continue to deliver key services, and as a board we are concerned about the impact of further cuts on their well-being and morale. Finally, I want to say that probation in Northern Ireland works. We know this from the outcomes of a whole range of evaluation of practice. I regularly hear from people who have said that without probation they just couldn't have turned their lives around. Indeed, if you look at a recent video from one of our service users on Twitter, you'll hear him talk about how probation changed his life and how his probation officer saved his life. William's story is just one of many. These are real people and they live in our communities, and they will be impacted if our services are reduced. So I'm going to hand over now to Amanda, and she'll provide some more of the detail on these challenges.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee and the warm welcome. As you said, I was appointed as Chief Executive of the Probation Board in October 2021, and over the last 4 months I have met with probation staff as well as our service users and many of our partner organisations. Together with the board and senior leadership team, I've been working through the issues and challenges for probation. It will come as no surprise to the committee that there are significant challenges in delivering our service. This includes increasing demand and growing complexity in our caseload, difficulties in retaining professional social work staff, and layered onto that is the impact of the potential reductions we are facing in the next 3 years. As the committee will be aware, probation is unique as it's involved in all stages of the criminal justice process. I say this because it's important context in understanding the implications of budget reductions for probation and the potential impact on other parts of the justice system, wider public services, and notably health and social care, which this draft budget is seeking to protect. Currently, probation staff are working with over 4,000 individuals, and we expect this caseload to rise, particularly as the justice system continues to recover from the impact of COVID-19. In addition to this, the complexity of cases we are dealing with has also increased, with many of the individuals we work with presenting with addictions, mental health issues, and many are at risk of suicide and self-harm. Probation staff work with and deliver a range of interventions and support to manage this group of individuals. If we are not in a position to intervene at the earliest opportunity, we know that many of those people will go on to reoffend. And there is also a clear impact for the health and social care system. Reducing our ability to do that work will simply just push the problem further downstream at a much greater cost. Probation provides positive health and social care outcomes for our service users. I would therefore make the case, if the decision is to prioritise health and social care, that probation's role in delivering these outcomes should be recognised by protecting probation's budget, or at the very least minimising the impact of these reductions. Another challenge I touched upon in the written briefing to the committee is pay modernisation. Our probation officers are social work qualified and professionally trained in the assessment and management of risk. I am very proud to lead what I consider to be an outstanding probation service. But we are having significant difficulties in retaining social work staff. We have lost a number of our experienced staff due mainly to the pay differential between social workers within probation compared to other sectors. This is having an adverse impact on workloads, how we deliver probation practice, and critically, the loss of experienced staff who are responsible for managing our most complex and higher risk casework. One of the main challenges is the need to reform the pay structure. Initial costings show a minimum requirement of 1.3 million over the 3-year budget period to deliver the changes required. And additional funding would be required from the department for that pay modernisation. I am therefore asking the department to support probation in providing the additional funding. I am also mindful that probation needs to be an efficient organisation. This will require further consideration, but in the medium to long term, we may potentially realise efficiencies from some of our modernisation projects in IT, workforce modernisation and through our estates. Work will be continuing with the board to refine our budget requirements to mitigate the impacts of our current pressures. Undoubtedly, the scale of these pressures will impact on staffing levels, probation practice and funding for the community and voluntary sector. In terms of our staffing levels, we have estimated that if the proposed allocation from the department for the 3-year budget period was implemented, that could lead to an estimated reduction of up to 33 probation officers. Those reductions would come at a time when the needs of our service users are becoming more complex and there is no indication of a reduction in our caseload. One of the most critical elements of our role is working with those who have committed sexual and violent crime, including domestic abuse. I know this is a priority for this committee, and probation has already seen an increasing number of domestic violence and abuse offences arising from the pandemic, and that trend is likely to continue. Any budget reductions could have the potential to impact on our ability to continue to meet the increasing demand. We are also under pressure with staff vacancies and need to recruit probation officers in the next number of weeks. A continual decrease in staffing will impact stress levels, sickness absence and increase attrition rates. If faced with reduced staffing levels, we would also need to make significant reductions to our practice standards and service delivery. Our standards are about how we deliver a safe and effective level of probation practice. In reality, further deviations from our standards would mean fewer risk assessments, reduced levels of contact with our service users, and fewer home visits for all of our risk levels. Standards have already been adjusted on the basis of our current staffing pressures. There is a significant risk of unsafe working levels and a heightened risk of harm to the public, service users, and public confidence in the justice system. Protecting our work in local communities against the backdrop of the level of budget reductions will also be a significant challenge, and we have work underway to review this currently. Reductions to funding we provide to the community and voluntary sector would impact essential employability, mental health, and alcohol and drug referral programmes. The additional support provided by these organisations is invaluable in ensuring that service users most at risk have access to support services, which mitigates the risk to themselves and others. Probation would have to reduce the scope of these services, and that would in turn potentially heighten the level of reoffending with increased costs across the criminal justice sector and wider public sector. Finally, Chair, I can just touch upon the area of problem-solving justice in which probation has been centrally involved. At present, the proposed allocation in Year 1 is sufficient to allow the continuation of the current programmes. Beyond that, there is limited scope to further develop the problem justice strategy. We fully appreciate the challenges to further develop these projects within the context of the potential budget reductions, and discussion will be required with the Department to understand the position going forward. If this is no longer deemed a priority by the Department, the current baseline should be maintained to allow those initiatives to be integrated into our core work and to ensure that the learning and outcomes are not lost. Chair, in summary, this draft budget will pose significant difficulties in maintaining the core work of probation. Our aim is changing lives for safer communities, and we know that the work we do improves outcomes for individuals, families, and wider society. Reducing our ability to carry out this work will lead to increased pressures on our staff, on other parts of the justice system, wider public services, and crucially, the health and social care sector. But importantly, the potential impact on the most marginalised people in our communities that we work with will be immediate, long-lasting, and will not be quickly repaired. Together with the Board, I have agreed that decisions on budget reductions will be tested against agreed guiding principles. These are to maintain our practice standards, to mitigate the impact on our service users, and the risk to public safety. We will continue over the next number of weeks to work closely with the Department to do our best to mitigate the risks posed by this draft budget. However, there are clearly challenges ahead, and I am grateful to have this opportunity today to discuss these with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and also I think it would be remiss of me as Chair of the Justice Committee not to express a word of appreciation and thanks to your staff for the work that they carry out, to both staff at the board themselves and your probation officers, because unfortunately, unless you have been in knowledge of the work of the board, whether it be on a personal or on a professional basis, many in society don't maybe see the work that goes on. But when you mention there being a risk to public safety, it surely should raise an issue of concern for the wider public in regards to the implications of this. I mean, you look at the figures, even based on what the Department gave us, it's probably somewhere around, even on a 2% cut, 120,000 plus. But you did raise an issue, and the Chair alluded to it, and you have it in your paper, and it has been highlighted, and it's maybe something that we want to try and understand a wee bit more, the pay modernisation, because clearly that has not been taken into account. So if that's taken into account, it's more, so you're starting at a 5% baseline lower than what you currently would have in terms of that pressure not being funded. Does that lead to, and you've alluded to this in the paper, but Basically, that alludes to the fact that you can't retain, or you can't have, somebody's going to go to a job in another area of the of service where there is a proportionately better salary. That must put huge pressure then on you being able to retain staff. And you have is there an attrition rate, or the number is 12.8% of a staff turnover. That certainly is a high percentage.
Chair, if I could just come back on that. The 5.3%, which the Chair mentioned, doesn't also include the additional funding that we require for pay modernisation. So it actually would be a higher percentage.
Right.
That is currently unfunded. The issues in terms of pay, you're absolutely right, relate primarily, the risk is in relation to retaining experienced social work staff, and it is to do with how the pay structures with our comparators is set. So the pay for probation officers and social workers generally is in the same scale. It sits around 31 to 39,000. However, if you work in the trust, for example, you would incrementally move through those pay points much quicker. I think there's 8 points in the trust, and in probation we're sitting on quite an outdated pay structure with 22 points. So what we're finding is that we are losing experienced social workers because they can move due to demands in the system across social work profession generally to other areas and get a better salary much quicker. And that's the issue in a sense for probation. It's not to give our staff more, it's actually to modernise the pay structure to bring them in line and allow us to compete in the same way for the same pool of people.
And that's very useful, Amanda, because it is an issue. We very easily get caught in a situation where we look at the headline figure, and rightly so. When we start to look at other aspects of the way in which it's structured, it can and is clearly adding to other pressures. So I'm keen to get to members, and members have indicated. So the Deputy Chair, Sinead Ennis, we're going to ask Sinead to put her question, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Amanda and the team for the briefing. I suppose just to echo the comments of the Chair there, I think, I certainly want to put on record, I want to recognise the probation board and the officers for the really positive rehabilitation role that they do. It's not an easy one, and I know that very often the probation officers are working under very difficult circumstances. So I think probation and that rehabilitation role that you guys do is very necessary. And it's probably, if we're being honest, it's maybe sometimes the poor relation within the justice family, and that's not right. And I think we need to take steps, certainly, or the Justice Minister needs to take steps to maybe redress that. Just on the issue of pay and the social work issue, because it is a serious problem. And I know that keeping staff and keeping good people and keeping those necessary social workers on the probation side is difficult. I'm just wondering what sort of discussions that you guys have had with the Minister about the pay scale for social workers. And also, just to add to that, is there any thought to perhaps allowing social workers to maybe be employed with the health, with the trust, and then seconded into probation when needed? Is that maybe something that people are thinking about, or is that maybe that's too left field? That's not a goer at all. And just on the I'll just probably get all the questions out now. Just on the discussions with the Minister, and obviously it's really useful that you are with us today, and I know this committee wants to play a good, positive role in terms of probation and actively use whatever power we have to help you on your way. But is there anything we can do as the committee in terms of lobbying the Minister and making sure that rehabilitation piece, if we say that it's important and we want it to be an important part of the justice process, how do we make sure that the necessary funding is there, and how do we help you lobby the Minister to make sure that funding's in place? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll maybe take it, and I can invite the Chair just to come in relation to discussions at board level and with the Minister. But just to say, I do welcome the comments, and I think, in fairness, probably My staff would also feel at times that they're the poor relation in the justice system, but that certainly isn't reflective of the support that we have from the Minister and from the Department. In terms of the actual issue around social workers generally across the entire public sector, there is a shortage, and I think that probably needs to be taken into context around the number who are coming through universities, and that responsibility sits with the Department of Health currently in terms of workforce supply. I think in recent times there has been an effort to increase possibly to about 40 places. However, given the number of vacancies that we're currently sitting with, that doesn't seem to me that it would be sufficient to meet even the demand that we have, let alone the demand in other parts of the health sector in particular. So I think if I was to ask of anything from the committee, it would probably be in relation to making representation to the Department of Health through our own Minister in relation to the workforce supply issues in the first place, because we're all trying to take from what is becoming an increasingly difficult and small pool of professionally trained people. I do welcome the support of the committee in terms of working with us in relation to the pay modernisation. I have alerted the department to the pressure. We have secured agreement to work forward on an outline business case. We've submitted an early business case and we're progressing work on that. And we've had discussions this week in terms of actually working alongside the department to try and address the issue. But the outstanding funding to do this is not included in our budget, and I suspect it will be a pressure for the department in the context of the budget reductions going forward.
Okay, thank you. And I think on that point, I would say not to preclude what the committee would agree, but I don't see that we'll have any issue of making that representation to the Health Minister in relation to the issue that you raise, Amanda. Chair, do you want to make a comment as well?
If you don't mind, Chair, yes, thank you. The just to welcome the comments so far. In terms of something else that we might consider as a committee that potentially can help us, we've outlined the fact that quite a lot of the work that probation does contribute to health outcomes. Yeah. You know, and if certainly our representation back to the department, and I would welcome your support, would be that find some way of protecting that element of our budget. If we can continue to help deliver those health outcomes, that'll be a big step forward in helping us continue to achieve, you know, for the greater good, and actually save a lot of money down the road. Because, as Amanda's very articulately outlined, if we don't deal with these issues, they just get worse, and we have to deal with them at much higher expense later on.
Peter?
Thank you. I mean, thank you for your presentation. It was just a couple of points, and then a quick question. I think you've very clearly highlighted, and I think the significance of the issues being faced. I suppose showing perhaps the lack of joined-up thinking that, if you like, making cuts in probation then of the knock-on effect of a much more impactful further down the line in terms of cost, and I suppose also the extent to which there's a sort of a false dichotomy between putting money into health, but then, shall we say, taking the roots of health and not actually feeding those, you know, I think on that side of things. And I suppose in terms of the pay issue, I think the other points which we made in terms of the pay issue is there's a potential double whammy, because if modernisation is not catered for from a pay point of view, we're also against a backdrop at which, probably more so than there's been the last 20 or 30 years, a levels of pressure on household bills for individuals. So that's going to have a very major impact, not because people particularly don't want to go to probation or stay in probation, but if they feel for the sake of their families that they're forced into a situation whether they have to, realistically, that their only practical option is them to seek work elsewhere or not be attracted into probation in the first place, that will have an impact. I suppose just a question I want to ask, and I know you've outlined sort of options in terms of where you would be forced to go down. You mentioned obviously in your, and I appreciate that this is not what you want to do or indeed where you're at in the final position, but you talked about that one of your guiding principles was to try to mitigate the impact on service users. I suppose it would be quite helpful to put on the record that despite whatever mitigation that you'd be looking at, what the the practical implications for a service user effectively on the ground, because I think that would be useful to help actually people capture in their own minds what the nitty-gritty impact of this would be for. I appreciate the service users for probation will come from a wide range of people. It's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but in terms of what you would see as the practical implications if these cuts were to go through, and despite whatever levels of attempted mitigation you were still forced to make changes to the service level provision that you could provide.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thank you for the comments, and particularly in relation to the point about joined-up thinking and justice. And you're absolutely right in terms of the decision that staff are taking, is that they are looking to see that they have mortgages, and even to get a mortgage if they have a higher salary, that they're in a much more attractive position to go and approach a bank. And that's partly the reason that they're saying to me they're leaving. And it links also to the point that was made by the previous member in terms of, I think this situation does present an opportunity for us to work with Department of Health much closer in relation to supply of social workers and how we move people across the system as opposed to just looking into our own areas. But I think that's probably a wider discussion, but I think it's a point I didn't pick up in the last question and wanted just to come back to. In terms of the practical implications and service users, I, over the last number of months, have met with a number of service users and have been hugely impressed by the work that probation does in supporting them and managing the level of risk that they present to the local community. They are people largely who are living in the community, often unnoticed, and our staff are allowing that to happen, largely because of the support and the interventions that they are putting in place in relation to those people. And when I talk about deviations in practice standards, what that means is that we would actually, in effect, reduce our levels of contact, and that's to do with the pressure that we would have, and that in turn has a potential to increase the level of risk that those individuals pose, both to themselves, because a lot of them are suffering from mental health issues and drug addiction issues, and being able even to signpost them and give them that support on a continual basis is important in terms of the rehabilitation journey that they are on. But just to give you just a sense of the sort of caseload that we have, it's only 25% of our service users would fall within that low risk category. So even if we were to minimise and really reduce down the level of contact that we had with our low risk caseload, it would have very little impact in terms of the actual staffing that we could realise to manage the higher and medium risk. We will always divert our resources towards higher risk individuals. But just to give you a sense, even in terms of the contact with the medium risk, who currently sit about 42% of our caseload, we would, at present, we have weekly contact for the first 8 weeks. We then move to fortnightly for 6 months, and we do a house visit within the first 8 weeks. What we would be looking at would be actually pushing those timescales, that we wouldn't be able to do minimum of weekly for 8 weeks at a time, and it just moves them into then the sort of the low risk of what we're providing in that sort of scale. So it is to do with actually the management of the individuals themselves in terms of making sure that they continue on the rehabilitation journey, that we are providing the interventions and support to prevent them from reoffending, and also giving that assurance to the public around their ability to live in the community and to work and to continue to contribute while they're undertaking that process.
Sinead Bradley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Amanda and Dale for your presentation. I too just want to go on record to thank you for what you do and all the staff, because it does appear to be a very high pressure job at times, and increasingly so if staff numbers are an issue. In terms of the presentation, Amanda does very much speak to that body of work that you do that could be directly connected to either preventative work that takes pressure off health and social care, or direct work that feeds into it and is a partner in health and social care. And I just wonder, you appear to have mapped that out well, in terms of what you operationally do and achieve. And I wonder, has there been any conversation with the Department of Justice and the Department of Health? Because this perhaps is, we always talk about coming out of silos, and if ever it needed to happen, this is surely the time, when we're looking at the 3-year budget ambitions. And another point I'd like to raise, Amanda, while I have my mic open, I am quite sure that you or anybody within the probation board did not use lightly the words that have warned us today. And I hear your red flag being raised on this, that the likelihood of increased reoffending due to fewer risk assessments, and to have used the words that there will be a heightened risk of harm to the public. That's a very, very big statement, and it's very rational when you look at the evidential base you've put behind it. And I just want to know, are you sensing that the reality of that and the enormity of that is being heard at departmental level?
Thanks, Ed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just in terms of context around, we probably estimate in probation that the total cost to probation of the services that we deliver that have direct links to both health and perhaps Department of Economy and Department for Communities, less so, from our various funding streams is over £2 million. And that relates to substance misuse, mental health, addictions, and also providing some support for people as they transition from custody into the community in terms of employment programmes and support for housing and accommodation. In terms of our linkages with the department in relation to that, we have, over the last number of weeks, as we have been managing the pressures in the organisation, been providing information to the department to inform whether other departments should be approached or asked to fund part or all of those programmes, given particularly that Department of Health are likely to have more funding as a result of the draft budget. There are very difficult decisions regarding priorities, and £2 million out of our budget is quite a substantial amount of money around some of the preventative work that we do, and also some of the programmes that are directly related to substance misuse and mental health in particular. In addition to that, and that is what we pick up within the organisation ourselves, a lot of our service users will tell us that they have difficulty accessing mental health services, particularly within the local community, and probation board psychologists are intervening in that gap to provide assessments and interventions to support that at present, and we're currently doing that within our core budget. But I do think that there probably is a conversation that needs to take place, and I suspect that the committee will be hearing it from others in relation to more joined up delivery, particularly in relation to those health related issues, but there's also connections to other departments as well. The Chair, the member is correct in saying that we did ponder in the discussions that we had in advance of coming here today around some of the stark reality of what we're facing into, and wondered whether the tone was correct, but we did feel that we really needed to alert the committee to the situation that we're facing. And I had some of these discussions with the board last month and with the Corporate Resources Committee on Friday to make them aware just of the implications of this. And that's largely to do with, we are probably already in year one of budget reductions at the minute because of the number of vacancies that we have. And staff are really feeling the pressure of that because we're carrying vacancies. We've had to make a number of those adjustments to our practice standards already. And it is a very, very difficult place to be. And it is probably what keeps a lot of us awake at night in terms of the actual potential risk and what that actually means. To continue further into that would be incredibly difficult for us, and particularly because there isn't any real resilience in the system, particularly in relation to the availability of social workers. So I do welcome the opportunity today, but I say wholeheartedly that what I am presenting to you is not over-egging what is a very stark and serious situation, which is we are currently in and are likely to go further into in this budget period.
Very much, Amanda. Rachel?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll not go over a lot of what's been said. It's been covered by other members, but I also too would like to thank you all at Probation for what you do. You do some of the most important work and very often overlooked. Sad to say, but you really are holding a lot of people together and providing the support whenever they can't get it elsewhere. So just want to put that on and my thanks to you all. The amount of work that goes in from probation to reducing reoffending. Committee have looked at, how can we reduce reoffending, and we're looking at a paper later on about getting in at the root causes of offending and behaviour and so on. With these kind of budget cuts that are being potentially passed down from the department, what kind of impact on the reoffending rate would you see that if it was the one with the 2% and the reductions that you've been posed with?
Chair, I probably wouldn't be in a position to give an estimate on reoffending rates. It might be something actually that I would like to sit down with my staff and maybe write to the committee just around some of those figures, rather than starting to get into estimating what I believe to be reoffending rates today.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Sorry, it's just, I think it's what we key for the committee to know then as well, and the department is, with the kind of budget cuts that are being proposed, that that these are very serious consequences, and that should very much so be taken into consideration. The budget cuts shouldn't be happening anyway, but that's a whole other conversation. But thank you, Chair. That's all I have. Everything else was covered.
Thank you, Rachel. Robin?
Thank you, Chair. Could I publicly congratulate Amanda on her role? I have privately done so, but congratulations on your appointment. And really, Chair, I think Amanda indicated that she hoped she wasn't over-egging the pudding when she was outlining, and I don't think that is the case. I think we made the point last week, Chair, to the Youth Justice Agency, where the impact that the cuts would have on the service that they were providing. And indeed, I think we took the same approach as indeed I think Gail outlined when he indicated that investment at this stage, addressing the issues at this stage, and if you don't address the issues at these very early stages of offending, then indeed you pay a much greater price for society in the longer term, as the difficulties for the offender become more and more complex. Chair, maybe in terms of the same as we had asked from the Youth Justice Agency, if there is any evidence available that investment at this stage of the process does in fact save money in the longer term within the process, then that might be helpful, Chair, in the case for the committee. I hope arguing in favour of support for the budget to be rectified.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if that information was available, I think that would be helpful to us, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Chair, yes, absolutely. I'm happy to provide that to the committee by way of a written briefing. It relates primarily to the problem-solving justice initiatives, and I see there is a paper on the committee later today. That early investment does realise benefits, but it is costly upfront, and it is a slow burn often as well in terms of realising some of the outcomes. We probably are very enthusiastic about some of those projects and don't want to see them lost, but we do also understand the difficulty that the department is in relation to continuing to support those projects and the rollout of the projects, because what we're funding at the minute by way of problem-solving justice is a number of pilots that do need to be rolled out, but certainly there's lots of evidence, and we're currently pulling together some of the figures for that for a Northern Ireland Audit Office review of reoffending in terms of problem-solving justice initiatives and the impact they're having. So happy to provide that.
Okay, thank you. and maybe just to bring this into a conclusion, Amanda, there's always this issue too, and you make reference to the addiction, the problem solving, the mental health issues and so on, and all the work that the board's involved in. But in the delivery of those health and social care outcomes, is there work that's carried on between the Department of Health, the Department of Education, and maybe even the Department of Communities, and even maybe the Department of the Economy, that you are not funded for? Because sometimes we find this when we start to speak to departments or organisations, that there's work that they carry out, however it's not funded, and they are picking up the cost, they are picking up the price tag for it. Is there any elements of work that currently the probation board is involved in that might allude to, or that might be the case for?
Chair, I'm going to ask Paul just to give an...
I'm just glad that, because Paul thought he was maybe going to get away with it.
Well, in fairness, I did, when you said as a finally, I thought I would let him earn his money today.
Chair, yes, there's probably a number of initiatives where we're primarily probably working with the community and voluntary sector for early interventions for our service users.
Yes, right, okay.
Particularly around early addiction services, where we can get speedy referrals for our members. It would be one of our core pieces. And that's really across the board as well, where we have working well strategies and transition strategies, where we'll try and get members.
Chair, I'm going to ask Paul just to give an...
I'm just glad that, because there's an echo in here.
Sure, we would like to get service users into employment as soon as possible, because that's one of the key pieces in terms of...
Well, in fairness, I did, when you said as a finally,
I'll just try and get this knocked off here.
I thought I would let him earn his money today.
Thank you.
Sure, yes, there's probably
it's not off yet.
initiatives
No,
where,
I'm going to
we're primarily probably working with the community.
Sorry about that, Paul.
Technology.
So there are, and it might be useful, it might be helpful for us to get a sense of what the breadth of that is, or maybe what the cost of that is, because it has a direct impact in the overall capacity of the organisation and to be able to do its work.
Yes, we can provide the committee with more detailed response on that.
Okay, thank you. Can I just thank you for coming? Thanks to Amanda, thanks to Dale, and thanks to Paul. And there are a few things that we'll tidy up, and some representations that we'll make as well. And when we have those responses, we'll be happy to share them with you, and also what you've agreed to supply in terms of further information to the committee. But in the meantime, thank you again for all your work, and I wish you well, and good to see you all. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much, and thank you for the comments, particularly in relation to the staff. They'll be warmly welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. Okay, members, just in a sense to give us staff a minute or two to turn the presentations and starleafs are okay anyway. Just to follow up, we would agree to write to the Health Minister in relation to the issues that we have discussed. Yes.
Yeah.
Just do you want to give a summary of what?
I think what we've agreed to do is write to the Health Minister regarding the workforce supply issue.
Yeah.
The Probation Board have agreed to provide further information on reoffending rates and also evidence of investing that makes savings later on, as Robin had asked for. I think there was a number of comments and issues raised regarding the rehabilitation work and the effect that we will try and reflect in the draft committee response on the budget, if that's okay.
Okay, have enough. Thank you, members. Thank you. Can I then move to item agenda 5, and it is the oral evidence session with the Northern Ireland Prison Service, and the representatives from the Prison Service are attending via Starleaf, and members, you'll find the relevant papers at pages 41 to 50 of the meeting pack. And can I welcome to the meeting this afternoon Mr. Ronnie Armour, the Director General of the Northern Ireland Prison Service, David Kennedy, Director of Prisons, Stephen McCord, Acting Director of Rehabilitation, and Brendan Griffin, Head of Strategy and Governance in the Northern Ireland Prison Service. And just before I ask the Director General to make a few introductory remarks, just to inform him that we have agreed in the previous, just in the matters arising in our committee meeting, to request a separate briefing from the Prison Service and the Chief Inspector, following on from the publication this week of the review into the care units. So that is a piece of work. It is not that we take this as obviously a very important piece of work for collectively as all to look at, but so that we focus solely today on the budget issues, we will return to that issue later on this month. So that, I hope, gives, and can I also thank the Director General for his offer of a visit to the CSU unit, and that's something that the committee will consider, so thank you for that. But Ronnie, in the meantime, thank you, and I just ask you to make a few comments, and then if members could indicate if they have questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I am grateful for the opportunity to speak to the committee today about the draft prison service budget for 2022 to 2025, and indeed for your warm welcome to the meeting. I'm very happy to attend a future meeting to discuss with the committee the CSU report, and would want to extend an invitation to the committee to come and visit one of our CSUs for their own information and to see exactly what it's like and what happens there. Mr. Chairman, in the paper submitted to members in advance, I sought to outline the significant savings we have already delivered over the past 10 years before providing information about the pressures we will face if the draft budget for 2022 to 25 remains unchanged. In essence, we face two issues. Firstly, a potential shortfall of just over 9 million if the proposed 2% cut to our baseline is imposed and we receive no additional funding to meet the significant pressures we face in the next financial year. And secondly, the impact that will result if funding is not provided to enable the service to continue to manage the challenges presented by COVID-19. As my paper highlights, we forecast a potential spend in excess of 3 million if we are to keep our COVID mitigation measures in place and cover the cost of COVID staff absences. The situation with COVID is of course changing, and I would hope the funding required will reduce as the situation improves. In summary though, as things currently stand, that means we face an overall budget shortfall of between 9 million and 12 million in the next financial year. The shortfall significantly increases in years 2 and 3 of the budget period. Turning to the work we are doing in preparation should the draft budget remain unchanged, it is important to be clear with the committee. It is simply not possible to make the level of cuts required from us in the timescale available. As 70% of our budget is allocated to staffing, our focus will have to be on reducing staffing levels, and that will take us time to do. Consequently, I have no alternative, or I will have no alternative but to stop recruitment from the 1st of April and leave all vacancies unfilled if we don't receive the necessary funding we require. The impact of that decision, coupled with the suspension of overtime payments, will immediately impact on service delivery. Stopping recruitment would reduce our operational staffing level by about approximately 84 members of staff in each of the next 2 financial years. Therefore, providing a saving of approximately 1.5 million per annum, that is 3 million over the 2 years. An immediate and ongoing reduction in staffing levels would mean accommodation would have to be closed at each of our prisons, and doubling or cell sharing significantly increased. We would anticipate the following. At Maghaberry, we would need to close Ban and Foyle houses, which would result in around 458 prisoners sharing cells. At McGilligan, we would need to close H3, which would result in around 228 prisoner sharing cells. And at High Bank, we would need to close Elm and Willow, which would mean 12 female prisoners would end up sharing cells. That would mean almost 700 prisoners across the prison estate sharing cells. The number, of course, would rise if our population continues to increase at its current rate. In terms of the rehabilitative services we provide, even with the reduction of around 168 staff over the next 2 years, we will still fall far short of the savings required. So in practice, we would have to fundamentally and urgently change what we do. We are currently assessing the impact if, for example, we decided not to provide learning and skills and resettlement services to remand prisoners or those who have short prison sentences of, say, 12 months or less. That accounts for around 60% of the current prison population. If we adopted this approach, it would have a detrimental impact on programme for government indicators, such as the rate of reoffending, and a resultant increase in the number of victims, as remand and sentenced prisoners would be released without planning or support. Moving forward, services to other prisoners would have to be prioritised in terms of risk. For example, if release was dependent on the completion of a specific programme. From the 1st of April, the funding we provide to the voluntary and community sector, that is our partners from that sector, who work alongside us in delivering rehabilitative and through the gate services, would also have to reduce by somewhere in the region of £440,000 per annum. The damage this will do to those excellent organisations and the prisoners and prisoner families they serve is unquantifiable. It would be a mistake to underestimate the far-reaching impact this will have on our prisons and on our community. As a precautionary measure, I have already written to each of our partners to put them on notice. The committee will wish to note that the savings I have outlined today remain at a very high level and no final decisions have been taken. Much more work is needed, but the impact will go far beyond the areas that I have highlighted if our budget remains unchanged. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, it is important that I paint a realistic picture for the committee. In the 5 years I've been in this post, I have not raised the issue of resources with the committee before, but the impact of the draft budget, if unchanged, taken with the increasing costs we face and the pressures resulting from COVID, are such that we all need to understand the potential risks that lie ahead. The progress we have made in recent years would be reversed. There would be increased pressure and instability within our prisons, and prisoners, both sentenced and remand, would return to their communities unprepared. The latter would undoubtedly reverse the downward trend in reoffending rates, with all that that would mean for the rest of the justice family and for wider society. But most importantly, those who will suffer most will be our staff and those in our care. That said, Mr. Chairman, let me assure the committee that the prison service will continue to provide the best service we can within the resources that are available to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you for that final comment in relation to that reassurance. And I think that is reflected, and it would be only proper of me as Chair of the Justice Committee to take this opportunity to thank you, your staff, your senior management staff, and all our prison officers and all those associated with the prison service for the way that you have been able to manage the last number of years, particularly in relation to the COVID crisis. And I think that it is commendable that the rates of infection in our prison population was considerably lower, and almost, as I think I've maybe even said, if you compare them to other places, non-existent, and that did impact on your officers, it impacted the prison staff, but in a very small way. However, you did have over 17% of officers who were off as a result of COVID. But I think I want to place on record my appreciation, I know I speak for other members of the committee in relation to that, but I want to get to a query that has been on my mind for a few weeks. I had the privilege of visiting along, and it was good to see David with you as well, David Kennedy. I had the privilege of visiting Davis House, and obviously we all were pleased when Davis House came into operation. And in your presentation, and I'm maybe straying in a wee bit to the capital stuff, but I just want maybe clarity in this. Is it true to say, Ronnie, that if you still didn't have ban and foil in McGabry, that you wouldn't have been able to have operated in the way that you did during COVID? And if this budget was to stay as it is, and you had to close ban and foil in McGabry, that just leads to the outcome that you just outlined, in that you would have doubling up and you would have greater pressure on the way in which you manage the current prison population.
Chairman, that's exactly right. If we hadn't opened Davis House when we did, just a few months before the pandemic, we as a service, I believe, would have been in real trouble by this stage. The fact that we had Davis House and we still had the square houses like Ban and Foyle and Lagan available to us meant that one of the very early steps we could take was to put every prisoner into a single cell. And there is no question that that helped in terms of managing the risk that we have from COVID. If the current budget remains unchanged, we would have no alternative but to double very significant numbers. And I've said in my presentation around 700 prisoners. We would have no alternative but to do that, because we wouldn't have the staff and we wouldn't be able to afford to keep the accommodation open. So the assertion you made is absolutely correct.
Do you, and I accept and thank you for that. And there's another part of this which is becoming increasingly worrying for me, as not only as chair of the Justice Committee, but as a citizen, as a member of the public in Northern Ireland, and that is the growing number of prisoners that you have who are on remand. Because I take it that I am right to say you cannot refuse who it is that comes through your gate. So if, as a result of the other parts of the justice system, people are placed in remand, they ultimately will end up in your care and the care of your governors. How worried are you about the number of prisoners that are in remand, and particularly the impact that that has, because some of those will be innocent because they will go through a due process of the law and may be found to be innocent at the end of that. But they've spent a considerable time on remand in a prison in Northern Ireland, and the pressure and the cost implications. And am I right in saying that the cost implications, it is something like, is it £55,000 to keep a prisoner in a prison in Northern Ireland per year? Or is that a Northampton estimation? And that's maybe what we would want it to be. I'd want it to be a lot lower, I have to say. But what is that cost? So that we have some realistic view of what this means to the public purse.
Well, I'm glad to be able to tell you it is lower than that, Mr. Chairman. The current cost per prisoner place is £44,956. Now, if you were looking at the cost per prisoner place at the point of the devolution of policing and justice, it was £73,800. So we have been, I think, an extremely efficient organisation in bringing costs down over the past 10 years. I'm not complacent about that. Our cost per prisoner place is still higher than it would be in England and Wales, Of course, in England and Wales, they have much better economies of scale than we do, and that they have a very large prison estate where we only have 3 prisons. But we are much closer to the cost across the rest of the UK than we would have been a number of years ago. To answer your question about remand, yes, I am concerned. I'm concerned about 2 things. I'm concerned about the numbers of people we have on remand and the length of time those people are spending on remand. You're right to say the prison service can't turn anybody away. We take on a daily basis whoever the courts send to us. Currently today, 607 of our 1,602 prisoners are on remand. That's 37.9%. Now, if you were comparing that with the Republic of Ireland, England, Wales and Scotland, you would find that we are very considerably higher in terms of that percentage rate. But just to unpack that a little bit for you, we have 70 women in custody today, and 54% of those women. Sorry, I thought I lost the connection there.
I lost connection there. You're just at the point there, Ronnie, apologies, where you're referring to the female prisoners.
We have 70 females in our care today. 54% of them, that's 38 individuals, are on remand. And we have 64 young men at Hyde Bank, and 66% of them are on remand. Again, 42. If you look at the population in Maghaberry, just over half, 51% of the men who are there, and we just have over 1,000 today, are on remand. So you can see the scale of the problem and the scale of the challenge that we as an organisation are facing.
And one final question from me before I go to members, and if there's any members just want to indicate, obviously there's and rightly so, we're seeing a huge impact on families in relation to the energy crisis that we now are in. And given the scale or the size of the state of our prison service, what impact will the rise in energy costs have, Ronnie, on the prison service?
Well, it's having a very significant cost, Chairman. We heard some very concerning figures the other day about the impact on schools. But prisons operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. In the last number of months, we have seen a very significant increase, and I had to bid for the last quarter of the year for additional £500,000 towards our utility costs, and that was within a week or so of bidding. I mean, that figure had been surpassed and it significantly increased. So we are looking next year at very significant pressures around our utility costs, and we think those are only going to continue to increase as the year goes on.
One of the other issues that you had raised, and it is extremely sad that you have been placed in this position, and that is that you will have to cease recruitment. And the organisation has faced, as you had previously made reference to, pressures where there have been reductions in previous years. And given the high percentage of your budget is on staff, is there a concern, and I noticed in a reply that I got from the Justice Minister when I asked for the operational challenges that would be faced by Northern Ireland Prison Service should the current draft budget remain unchanged. The Minister said that it would have significant and lasting operational impact. So if this was to stay as it was and you carried out what you have said will be the outcome, there will be no recruitment, you will have officers who retire, natural wastage in terms of people leaving the service, you will end up in a situation similar to that of the police service, who are looking at, over the 3-year period, reducing their numbers down to almost just over 6,000 officers, where currently it is just over 7,000 officers. That must surely put huge pressure on the system and is not sustainable.
It absolutely will, Chair. When I took over as Director General 5 years ago, we were considerably understaffed, and one of the commitments that I gave to the POA and to our staff was that I would bring the staffing levels to the required level. Now, it has taken us a long time to do that. We're not quite there yet, but we have, I think, at the moment, the best staffing levels that we've ever had. If we go to April and I have to turn off the recruitment tap, then we will see that staffing level start to deplete. And it's my estimate that we will deplete by around 80 to 90 officers in the first year of the budget period, and that will have a massive impact in terms of what we can deliver. And the challenge for us is we as a service provide many different rehabilitative services to the people in our care, but we need staff to ensure that prisoners get the learning and skills where our Belfast Met colleagues can work with them. We need to make sure that people can get to all of those appointments. Without the staff that are required, we won't be able to do that. So we will see additional pressures on our staff. We will see our sick absence levels continue to increase, and we simply won't be able to provide services, and we won't be able to afford to provide the services that I think have helped transform the prison service over the past few years.
Thank you, Ronnie, for that. Sinead Bradley.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Ronnie and team for your presentation. Ronnie, in your presentation, you referred to the likelihood of reoffending, and then you went on, obviously, to explain all those partners who play a part in all that rehabilitative work, including the colleges. I think it's Belfast that you work mainly with.
Yep.
Have you got an indication as to how much, in terms of your budget, is spent on that type of rehabilitation, so that all these arrows and projections are not pointing to reoffending as they appear to be across different agencies?
Well, we currently have a service level agreement with Belfast Met, and the cost of that is just over 3 million. About 3.5 million per annum. We fund a very extensive range of other partners to, I think, the value of around 2 million. 1.2 million per annum. So you can get a flavour from that we're talking somewhere in the region of 4.5 million.
Thank you. It's good to have an understanding of just the scale of that. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Sinead. And if there's no other questions, can I just conclude, Ronnie, with asking, in terms of the capital, and I declare an interest while it's not technically in my constituency. Well, it's not technically, it's not in my constituency. It's non-technical about it, McGilligan. But I have a considerable number. I have a considerable number of people who work in McGilligan who do live in Northumberland, and they have an interest in the reconfiguration of McGilligan. If we look at the capital forecast, I'm right in saying that the priority of delivery would still be the new facility for the women at Hydebank, reconfiguration of McGilligan, and the new visitors provision at McGabry. And is there a time scale for the commencement of any of the above?
You're absolutely right to say those are our priorities. We have at the moment OBC1 approval for the female facility and for the visits at Hydebank. We will, within the next few weeks, be sending the outline business case for McGilligan to the Department of Finance for their approval. We don't have specific dates yet for the start of work at any of those three sites, but we would be very hopeful that we will start to see capital funding come our way to begin the work on those projects fairly soon. In terms of the McGilligan site, we've been doing a number of things at McGilligan in preparation for the capital project. For example, we've put in a new power supply We've built a new place of worship, and we're currently building new store facilities and a new tuck shop. So all of that, I think, is really good preparatory work for McGilligan, and all of it demonstrates, I think, our commitment to the McGilligan site.
If this budget remains as it is, maybe, Ronnie, we might need to use that particular new facility at McGilligan, that place of worship, because we may need divine intervention to try and address some of these problems. However, thank you for that. And I suppose the other final comment is this in relation to the capital works, and that is, has consideration, because this was raised with me today in my own constituents in relation to new build for schools. We've had contracts where now they've now been brought to an end because the contractor said he can't build the particular facility for the amount of money that it was tendered for. Has there had to be a re-evaluation of the business case in the light of the rising costs in relation to the current materials issue, and just builders' costs generally have risen dramatically over the last 3 or 4 months?
Well, certainly, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the McGilligan business case, we have had to factor in significant cost increases, which makes the business case very challenging for us. At the moment, for Hydebank and Maghaberry, we're working on OBC2, the second business case, and we are undoubtedly finding that the costs have significantly increased, and that will have, I have no doubt, an impact on how much capital work the department is able to fund over the next number of years. So it is a challenge, but we will continue to evaluate those costs, and we'll continue to work on the business cases, and we'll continue to bid for that money, because the work we need to do to the prison estate is absolutely essential. And I think, everyone who's been to Davis House, which was a £54 million project delivered on time and on budget, can see the difference in terms of service delivery if the environment is a therapeutic environment like Davis House. And that's what we as a senior team aspire to have across the prison estate, to allow us to really do the work that we want to do with the people in our care, and as we support and challenge them to change their behaviours.
Thank you. And the final question, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Ronnie, and for the briefing as well, and for all your answers so far. I just have a few, and apologies, I'm having some problems here with the connection, so that's why my hand's up late. But in terms of the briefing to the committee, and you may have answered this already, for 22-23, the 270,000 for additional work requested by the department, would you be able to outline what that is? And apologies if you've already gone over that.
No, thank you.
No, I haven't gone over that, Rachel, and very happy to do that. I mean, some of that work will be around the work we want to do with the Police Rehabilitation and Retraining Trust in relation to retired officers and serving officers. The committee will be very mindful of the report that was published last year. I was delighted, and am delighted, that the Minister announced today the commencement of the scheme for retired officers, and we will shortly be announcing in terms of serving staff. But we haven't been given extra money for that. We've been funding that work internally, so there will be a very significant issue in the next financial year. So that's in part what that money's for.
Thank you, Ronnie. And just finally as well, and I know we're not discussing the Rtia report at this stage, but I do want to touch upon a previous report, and that was the RQIA one on healthcare, and this is purely in a budgetary issue. In the briefing, it says about a lack of equivalence with healthcare in the community, and I know you and I have had this conversation before. In terms of health, but there is a clear impact for community healthcare, which is being given additional funding. And if the prison service is not able to address the complex needs of many prisoners during the time in custody, so the prison staff are consistently required to manage the shortfall in healthcare provision. So just about maybe unpicking that a wee bit, in terms of the healthcare in prisons being underfunded, as has been highlighted in the RQIA review, and obviously that we know these proposed cuts are seems to be in order to boost funding for the Department of Health. That doesn't sit well with me in terms of balance there. It doesn't seem to be looking at the right issue. The proposed reductions in resources for the prison service would mean that healthcare services for prisoners would be worse off. Is that your understanding?
Well, I think it's important to say that healthcare in prisons is funded by the South Eastern Trust and not by the prison service. I very much welcome the RQIA report. I think the RQIA report is an excellent piece of work. I think it shines a light on an area that we've been highlighting as a prison service for a long time. The majority, I think 14 of the 16 recommendations, are for the South Eastern Trust and for the Department of Health, rather than for the prison service. I suppose what I'm saying, Rachel, is if we don't have the prison staff we need, then people are going to be sharing cells. They are ultimately going to be spending longer time in their cells, and all of that will have an impact on their mental health. And as you know, 32% of the people in our prisons today have mental health issues. So that's the point I'm trying to highlight. And I hope that the RQA report, in terms of vulnerable people detained in prisons, I hope it's implemented by the Department of Health and implemented in full, because I think that would make a very significant difference in terms of prisons and what we can do.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Ronnie, can I thank you and your colleagues, although the rest of them got it relatively easy. Maybe we should just go around each one of them and ask them a number of questions. But no, we'll not do that. But thank you to David, thank you to Stephen, and thank you to Brendan for being with you today and giving you that moral support. And we look forward to meeting with you later on in this month in relation to the other issue that we had raised earlier. But in the meantime, thank you very much, and thank you for the information that you've given us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, thank you for that. And just, I don't think that there's anything else that we need to mop up in relation. I think it's all reasonably well covered. Robin?
Yeah, Chair, I wonder if Sinead didn't mind if we could maybe build a wee bit just on the question that she raised. That was around the educational aspect of the impact that might have. It is both it's a well-being issue in prison, it's an educational issue as young people or older people try to move out of prison in terms of securing employment, careers or whatever for themselves. It's a significant amount of money. I think 3.2 million was the amount of money quoted. It might, if Sinead didn't mind, if we could maybe ask that a more detailed analysis of the impact of that in a shortfall within the budget.
Yep. Agreed?
Agreed. Thank you, Robin. Agreed, yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Sinead. Okay, thank you, members. That brings us to item agenda 6. Again, still on the budget, the final of the three presentations, and this one is from the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, and they're attending us by Starleaf, and the relevant papers are at page 52 to 59 of the meeting pack. And can I welcome Lynn Capper, Director of Access to Justice and the Northern Ireland Court and Tribunal Service, and Mark Goodfellow, the Chief Operating Officer, and Louise Laverty, the Head of Finance at the courts. Are they with us?
I think we just have to wait. I think, are they using the same room?
Oh, right.
They just need to swap
right,
over.
okay.
So
right.
if we could
I'll
just get them.
Give them a minute or two to turn around. Okay, if just members take your ease for a couple of minutes. Okay, Stephen. Yep. Lynn, can I welcome you and your colleagues and thank you for your attendance today. Understand you're joined by Mark and also by Louise, so you're very welcome to the committee. And we'll ask Lynn if he'll outline the issues in relation to the Northern Ireland Court and Tribunal Service in regards to the current draft budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I was supposed to check you can hear okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to update the committee on the impact of the draft budget on the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service. Before turning to the impact of the budget, I thought it would be helpful to say something about the agency, just to provide some context and to give you a sense of the scale of our operations. So as well as supporting all of Northern Ireland's courts and the majority of our tribunals, we also support the Coroner Service and the Legacy Inquest Unit. We have responsibility for enforcing judgments of the civil courts. We collect and enforce outstanding financial penalties imposed by criminal courts and have responsibility for funds held in court. We also provide administrative support to the Parole Commissioners for Northern Ireland and the Historical Institutional Abuse Redress Board and process awards on behalf of the board. And finally, we sponsor the Planning Appeals Commission and Water Appeals Commission. In terms of people, we support 72 salaried members of the judiciary and 20 commissioners, and we currently have approximately 800 staff, although we have around 100 vacancies, some of which are filled by agency staff. The paper you received in advance provides some information on our budget. Our net resource DEL baseline is £45 million. Of this, our expenditure baseline is £72 million, and we receive income of around £27 million per annum, largely relating to court fees. Excluding judicial and other related costs, 54% of our expenditure relates to staff costs, and 46% to non-staff costs. And of these, the vast majority relates to the 6 key areas outlined in the paper you received in advance. Again, just as background, over the past 10 years, the agency has faced significant budget reductions. Numerous steps have been taken to absorb these cuts, to manage in-year pressures and to absorb additional work. This has included a reduction in staff complement of 16%, a reduction in leased accommodation, for example by relocating 135 staff, and the closure of 2 hearing centres. Given the scale of budget cuts and the measures taken to absorb these over recent years, there's very limited scope to manage future budget reductions purely through efficiencies. Future efficiencies will take time and significant investment. We have ambitious plans to do this through our Vision 2030 programme, which seeks to modernise the agency under the 4 pillars of people, service design, digital and estates. But in the short term, reduced budgets will mean reduced services. Looking at the draft budget then, a proposed 2% reduction equates to a cut of £914,000 per annum. That in itself is significant, but as your paper shows, we also face major pressures in each of the next 3 years, representing somewhere between 9% to 14% of our expenditure budget. Those pressures relate to a range of areas, including pay inflation and other staff costs, pressures caused by increased volumes in tribunals and estate maintenance costs. We're currently reviewing and updating our pressures and in parallel developing options to live within a reduced budget and also absorb pressures. And this is a process that will be completed over the coming weeks. It's too early at this stage to say with certainty what the impacts of that will be, and we will, of course, as we have always sought to do, protect the front line as far as possible. But as I've said, the budget will impact on the services we provide. For example, it could mean a reduction in court sittings, which would result in delays to the speed of the criminal and civil justice system, with associated impacts on victims and witnesses. Just to say something about COVID funding, we received an additional £7 million this year and have forecast a requirement of £5 million next year. Again, this amount is being reviewed. But not just for courts and tribunals, but across the justice system, without additional COVID recovery funding, backlogs will continue. Turning then to capital funding, we have ambitious plans totalling around £150 million over the next 10 years. That includes significant work to the Royal Courts of Justice, new North West accommodation, a wider estates upgrade programme, and much needed improvements to our line of business IT systems. So in summary, I hope that in the context of the uncertainties around next year's budget and the fact that we're at an early stage in the process, this provides you with an overview of some of the issues facing the courts and tribunal service. And of course, Chair, we're happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Glenn. And again, I think all the organisations that we've spoken to today, we appreciate the work that is carried out by the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, and a lot of it goes on heeded, a lot of it goes on noticed, but if it wasn't there, we wouldn't have the system or the service that is provided in the Northern Ireland Court and Tribunal Service. A word of appreciation and thanks for that. But can I just draw you to the table that you gave us in relation to the current forecast pressures? And that table sets out the current forecast pressures, and it shows pressures for both estate maintenance and substance abuse courts. And they will double in 24-25. Can you maybe sort of explain to us as to why or what are the reasons for that in each of those cases? Why would that be the case?
Certainly, Chair, if I take each of those in turn, so if we start with the Substance Misuse Court, so we already have a Substance Misuse Court operating in Laganside Courts, which costs around about £450,000 or so a year. The figures in the table are pressures if we chose to roll out the Substance Misuse Court further. So in the first 2 years in the table, that will be rolling it out to a certain level, and then in the third year, rolling it out to an additional level. So obviously, and I think previously spoken with committee members about the benefits of the problem-solving justice approach, of which the Substance Misuse Court is one. So clearly there would decisions would need to be made there about to what extent we could afford to roll the Substance Misuse Court out further. If I turn then to estate maintenance, we've recently completed a State of the Estate report for the Courts and Tribunal Service. And that presents in quite a stark way some details about our estate. It's a very old, ageing estate with a significant amount of work needed to be done to it. So essentially, the figures you have for estate maintenance show, and caveat with all of these figures, those are estimates that are currently being refined, but that's an indication of the sorts of amount of money that we would need to and would like to spend on our estate. Just to continue to maintain it to appropriate levels. And obviously that's a programme that will take time to build up, hence that increase in costs over the 3-year period.
And apologies, Glenn, if you don't have this at hand, but in terms just as a particular in relation to the estate, do you have many listed buildings in the tribunal and courts estate? Because that obviously would create a huge additional cost to the running and maintenance of those particular buildings?
We do, Chair. I don't have the figures to hand, and I'll maybe ask colleagues if they do, but if we don't, Chair, we can certainly provide that in writing. There's lots of detail in that State of the Estate report, both about the age of our buildings, and most buildings are extremely old, and you're quite right, some are listed, which is a significant factor to the contribution of the very significant estate maintenance costs there. Not sure if Mark knows the number of listed buildings, but we'll come back in writing with that, Chair.
Yeah, we don't have the numbers, but Glenn's absolutely right. We do have listed buildings in there. When we look at the State of the Estate report, it tells us that the aggregate age of our estate is sitting at about 2,500 years old. So, and that's just indicative of the scale of challenge that we have in terms of maintenance and upkeep.
I hope that's not a reflection of how old our justice system is, but anyway, that's a reflection of a reality, and that creates a huge problem for us in terms of maintenance. My final question before I go to members, and this was raised with me earlier on this week by some in the legal profession who have seen the benefits of some of the new courts, the new problem solving, whether it's the substance misuse court or other elements have been introduced to our judicial system over the last number of years. Then is there a risk to those courts continuing? If not, at least some of them have been pilots, and I know one particular district judge is very keen to see what he piloted in the Northwest rolled out in other parts of the court service. But is there a risk that either a pilot won't continue and the rollout will come to an end and we lose the benefit of what has been something valuable in the system?
I think, Chair, and again, I've mentioned this to the committee, things like problem-solving justice are things that sometimes cost more to do than the regular way of doing things, but they have longer term and wider benefits. To answer your question about is there a risk of having to not do those, I think given what I've said about the impacts of the budget cut and the pressures we face, undoubtedly we will have to focus on our statutory duties and functions. And yes, that may mean that there is a risk to either substance misuse courts, for example, continuing. But certainly I think there's a risk of them not being rolled out further, simply as a function of the pressures that we face.
Members, apologies, I can't see who has their hand up because my screen has gone. Sinead, have you your hand up? Sinead? Yep.
Yes, Chair.
Yep. Go ahead.
As you could have predicted. Thank
no,
you, Chair.
not at all. I would never say that. Go ahead, Sinead.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for your presentation on this. And I suppose looking at it through the lens of because we will and have heard from some of the agency, the youth justice and the CAMS issue has certainly been raised with us, which was quite alarming and ironic, you know, when we're talking about prioritising health and mental health, and then the likes of those agencies being forced down a road which actually takes that off the table as an option is really counterproductive. But in terms then of accessing health, and I know we will be hearing from the bar and different bodies, but the impact on the wider justice system, you talk about that there's a possibility that there will be delay in payments. Now, I've heard it reported that delay in payments for legal aid could move from 8 weeks up to 47 weeks. And that's enough to close the doors of many small solicitors' firms, and particularly in small towns across Northern Ireland where that type of firm does exist. And I wonder, are we really now entering into the realms of access to justice for people in cities will be more readily available than people living outside of the cities that don't have the big solicitor firms that carry the resource to be able to wait 47 weeks for payments? And has there been any sort of rural proofing or screening done to look at the impact of these budget cuts across communities? And I think that's true of a lot of the outcomes that you have certainly presented in your paper. I just would be keen to know if that question has even been asked.
Thanks, Sinead, for your question. I suppose just important to say, in relation to the specific area of legal aid and the timing of payments and so on, that doesn't sit with the Courts and Tribunal Service. That's specifically with the Legal Services Agency, and I'm not sure if that agency has been or is due to appear before the committee, but I imagine it will be at some stage. So the implications of the legal aid budget and so on will be one for them to hopefully answer. In terms of your question about equality impacts and so on, what we have done is completed an initial equality screening assessment of the impact of the budget, but we've made clear in that over the coming weeks, as the sorts of decisions that we need to make become firmed up as part of that process, we will be carrying out further more detailed equality screening as we've got more concrete plans in place to live within our budget. Worth saying too, just going back to one of your original points, we do have good relationships with both the Law Society and Bar, as they're obviously key stakeholders in the operations of the Courts and Tribunal Service.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. And as I said at the outset, I know we will be speaking to those different bodies, but in terms of the overall access to justice piece, do you feel that that is something that you measure, or that you have a responsibility to ensure that that remains a level playing field?
I think if we come at access to justice, on one hand, from the legal aid perspective, as I say, Legal Services Agency will cover that. I suppose from a Courts and Tribunal Service, given our role in supporting the judiciary and courts and tribunals are available, there is obviously an access to justice angle there. And as we've said in some of our documents, potential impacts, things like potential reductions in the number of court sittings would have an impact in relation to the timeliness of justice, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's just that, a lot of these, well, they're not minor or small, any of them to be fair, but they're significant enough themselves. But I think once you compile them into, all the effects together, there is a real obvious building picture that access to justice will be difficult for a lot of people. And even when the access is achieved by some, then you talk about the delays and all of that. So it's just to know, to get a sense of, has the department started to take this holistic view of how all these measures coming together and all of these cuts, whilst we're hearing, the red flags from different agencies, and rightly so, how then is there an umbrella look at this to say what is the overall impact? And it's not stacking up to be a healthy picture, to my mind. And I suppose the one, for want of a better expression, the one screaming obvious thing is going to be the access to justice piece is looking very broken from the headlines you're presenting to us today.
Yeah, and to give you some assurance about, I suppose, that joined upness, as we've said, each agency and area of the justice system is currently working through what those draft budget implications look like. The department as a whole will then be taking those individual aspects and taking an umbrella view of how that looks against things like access to justice, and what that therefore means for the allocation of the overall departmental budget.
And I think, just to add to that, if I could, Glenn, I think to give you some assurance, Sinead, in terms of governance and oversight around that, there was a meeting this morning, which is part of a regular set of governance structures with the cross-departmental justice recovery group. Overlaying that, the Criminal Justice Board takes a very keen and active interest, so they will make sure that all of those dots are joined so that we understand the holistic impact across the piece. And I think from our perspective within the agency, and we had this discussion no more recently than this morning, every decision we take in terms of the budgetary impact can't be seen in isolation. So we're acutely aware that on one hand, it will have impact for professional legal members, On another hand, it will have a knock-on impact on colleagues in public prosecution service, because we don't run courts and tribunals in isolation. We have other colleagues coming in behind. On another hand, if we were to increase activity, for example, what level of pressure does that put on Ronnie Armour and his team and in PECs? And then, much more importantly, then what is the impact for victims and witnesses? And there's no shying away from, a difficult budgetary position will include some delay, and there will be victims and witnesses who have a delayed or slower access to justice as a result.
Thank you. It's helpful to know that conversation is happening. Thank you, and thanks for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Rachel?
Thanks, Chair. I'm not going to go over all ground. Mine was purely about access to justice, and Sinead has covered that. And Glyn, you've answered all of really my questions and issues there, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you. Maybe just touch on a different aspect. I appreciate that from what you've said, you're still trying to scope out potentially where things could land from a budgetary point of view. And I appreciate we're also additionally into the situation of we don't know whether this will be the final budget. And also, I suppose, uniquely, or possibly uniquely, at least to the extent, the Courts and Tribunal Service also perhaps find yourselves in a slightly unusual position compared to maybe some of the other aspects of government. You highlighted in terms of your overall budget of, I'm going to say, like, roughly speaking, an assessment that roughly about 60% of your budget comes directly from funding, and about 40%, if I picked you up correctly, was on the basis of what was generated in terms of court fees. And I appreciate in terms of court fees, setting those is something that you don't have control over. You're not able to say, what those should be. But I suppose if we're looking at what potentially is quite a large gap, both yourselves and others within the justice system, between what is needed, let alone what is wanted, what is needed and what is available. Could you outline what potential impact you see the overall budget situation having potentially on court fees? What realistically are we looking at there by way of an additional burden on people in terms of potential increases in court fees?
Okay, firstly to say it's a really good point. And yes, a significant amount of our income is through court fees. Over the past 5 years or so, Louise and her team led a major programme of reviewing and introducing increased court fees alongside introducing some new fees. So that did generate some additional income for us. There are, as you would expect, rules and regulations around what we can do with court fees. We target, for example, recovering our costs, and we seek to increase fees in line with inflation and so on. So as part of our response to the draft budget over the next 3 years, clearly looking at increased court fees will be something that we will do. We've already started that process. Given there's a lead-in time, it will probably be year 2 of the budget before we see a significant difference there. So clearly, yes, there is money that we can generate that will help meet some of our pressures. It's not going to solve all of our problems. And in general, and it's a really complex area, we literally have scores of different fees. But in general, if we could, for example, increase all of our fees in line with inflation, that would generate a few £100,000 of additional income that would start to make a bit of a difference to some of the pressures that we face. Not sure if Louise wants to say any more about some of the quantum amounts.
No, I think we would just look at, an increase in line with inflation. And as Glenn has said, it's not £1 million, it's a few £100,000 that would help, sort of add to the existing budget line.
There's a little bit of a catch-22 situation there, which is, I know, certainly there's a concern at present that inflation is running very high and could potentially remain very high. But I suppose there's a bit of a catch-22 in that if, for example, I'm not necessarily saying this is a virtuous thing anyway, but if, for example, there were inflation-rated increases in fees and inflation was moving at a higher rate, yes, in theory that would generate a bit more money. But it's also quite likely that some of the other pressures would also increase correspondingly in terms of a higher rate of inflation. That's more of a comment really than a question in that regard.
Okay.
And I think that's a fair comment. And one of the things to bear in mind in relation to court fees is that changing them isn't an agile process, so we can't quickly turn the court fees tap on and off to respond to other inflationary pressures.
But I think, Peter, just to add to that point, is on fees is a complex area. But just to reassure members that we're not exploring other options there to generate income. So if I look at fine collection service, for example, we are on target this year to increase fine collections to 2.6 million from about 1.8 million last year. So we're actively exploring other avenues by which we can try and fill the gap that you rightly alluded to.
Thank you. And just the final question then, and something maybe goes back to something we talked earlier about in relation to the problem-solving courts and so on. Clint, what's the update in regards to the planned domestic abuse court, and will it go ahead, and what are the projected costs in the next financial year?
Chair, can I come back to you in writing on that one, please?
Yep, that's fine, Lynn. Yes, that's okay.
Thank you.
Yep, that's fine. Well, listen, and with that, can I thank you and your colleagues for the time that you've given us today, to you, Glenn, to Mark and to Louise. Thank you for the information that you've provided for us. Obviously this budget is a challenge for us all, and we wait to see where it will all land in the next few weeks and months. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Members, can we agree, I think it would be useful, Sinead made reference to it, and it raised an issue which might be is relevant when we have in front of us the Bar and the Law Society, and that is in regards to the Legal Services Agency, because that figure that Sinead made reference to is becoming very prevalent in regards to the late payment or the delayed payment going from 8 weeks to 40 plus weeks, and that will have a devastating impact on many of our small local solicitors' offices. So does the committee agree that we'll write for a paper from the Legal Services Agency? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, members. We'll move then to the item 7, following on from the issues in relation to the briefings. You'll find at pages 61 to 67 the responses that have been received from the Police Ombudsman, the Criminal Justice Inspection, the Police Rehabilitation Retraining Trust, the RUC, George Cross Foundation, and they're all in the pack at pages 61 to 67. If you're content, we'll note the position of these particular organisations unless there's any other members have any other comment. The only comment I would make in relation to one that's the RUC George Cross Foundation, I think it is embarrassing the little amount of money that organisation gets, given the year that it is in terms of the centenary of the formation of the RUC and the work that they're doing. A real concern about the comment that they make in relation to having to reduce the maintenance at the RUC George Cross Memorial Garden. I think that it is little reflection of the sacrifice that was made, that the organisation tasked with the maintenance of the garden is placed in that position. So that's a note of concern, and I think it's something that needs to be flagged up with the Minister. That brings us on then, members, to item 8. The LMC, the extension to the Northern Ireland provisions in Chapter 3 and Part 2 of the Police Crime Sentencing Courts Bill, extraction of information from electronic devices. The information in relation to this is at pages 70 to 144. The Minister has previously written to the committee requesting views on the proposals to proceed with the legislative consent motion in relation to the Police and Crime Sentencing Courts Bill, regarding the extraction of the data from mobile devices on the basis that it would extend to Northern Ireland, but not to be commenced until the Code of Practice have been finalised and not without the agreement of the Assembly. The committee noted the Minister seeking the approval of the Executive. The Department has now advised that the Executive has given its approval for a conditional LCM and has outlined that the provisions will allow for the extraction of data from the relevant electronic devices in 2 scenarios, which are set out in the Senior Assistant Clerk's memo at page 71 of the meeting pack. The provisions will be supported by a code of practice which will provide guidance when using this power. Both the Attorney-General and the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission have raised a number of concerns regarding this draft code of practice. These have been shared with the Home Office, and the details of the amendments have been secured relevant to the Northern Ireland situation, and they have been provided by the Department along with the amended provisions of the draft bill. The Department has indicated that it will require all relevant concerns to be addressed as far as possible prior to the provisions of the bill coming into force in Northern Ireland. A copy of the consultation document, including an updated draft code, will be provided in advance of the public consultation, and the Home Office has also given assurance that relevant feedback, whether received from the Department or via the public consultation, will be captured in the final text. And the Minister has indicated that she will consult with the Assembly following the completion of the public consultation on the code, and will not agree to the commencement of the provisions without the consent of the Assembly. And just to advise members that there has also been a further amendment to the extraction clauses addressing the exercise of data extraction powers in relation to the confidential information. This has been provided for on the face of the bill rather than in regulations, and outlines a number of new steps that must be taken in addition to all other existing steps in the bill and in the code if an authorised person thinks that in exercising those powers there is a risk of obtaining such information. The Department indicates that this provides greater clarity in the exercise of the powers in the context of confidential information. The Department has also provided a summary of other proposed amendments that the Minister was asked to consider, and has provided the request and the response for the information. And so are members content in principle with the proposal to extend to Northern Ireland the provisions of Chapter 3 of Part 2 of the Police Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill insofar as they relate to Northern Ireland, and that the commencement of those provisions would be conditional on the Assembly agreement to consider whether the code of practice following the public consultation complies with protected rights and requirements, or if any other further information or clarification is required. Agreed?
Agreed.
You agree? You understood all of that, I have no doubt.
I was just about to ask you to repeat it.
Oh, sorry, what paragraph? Thank you. Agenda item 9 is an SL1 domestic abuse information sharing with schools in regards to the regulations Northern Ireland 2022. The information is at page 146 to 177. The Department of Justice is proposing to make a statutory rule which will be subject to the draft affirmative resolution procedure under the powers conferred in Section 26 of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act Northern Ireland 2021. The rule will enable the Department to bring forward regulations to provide for an Operation Encompass model for Northern Ireland, which is the Police and Education Early Intervention Partnership, enabling support for children and young people who are experiencing domestic abuse. The Department undertook a targeted 3-week consultation and has provided such information on the responses received and the issues raised as part of its briefing paper on the proposed statutory rule. The draft regulations have been prepared by the Department of Justice in partnership with the Department of Education, the Department of the Economy, the Department of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. And the Department of Education will be the lead for the rollout of the Operation Encompass once the regulations are in place, with the Department of the Economy being the lead in relation to the further education colleges and training providers. The Education Authority will be the operational lead, supported by the PSNI colleagues. And to seek the agreement of the members and to ask the Committee for Education, the Committee for Economy and the Committee for Agriculture for their views on the proposed regulations, given their relevance to the remits of their departments. Agreed? And to seek a request of a more detailed report on the responses to the targeted consultation on the regulations to assist consideration of the proposed statutory rule. and that really is from the department themselves, from the Department of Justice. Rachel?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I cut out there. It's my internet. We're on the Operation Encompass regulation.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, okay, no, thank you. Obviously, there was some outline of issues there in terms of what the Children's Commissioner's Office had raised. And I remember these discussions happening on Justice Committee about the inclusion of those children not covered in early years. I do remember this being brought up. But I note just in terms of the respondents that it stated about special schools having pupils up to 19, and they are not then within the scope of Operation Encompass. I certainly don't think that was the spirit at all of Operation Encompass and that amendment that the committee brought forward. So I note that the department says this cannot be provided for in the regulations, as primary legislation explicitly makes reference to a child being under the age of 18. But I'm wondering what regulations do need changed. Is it Operation Encompass, or is this a rollout issue, or is this something that needs to be done through education, and how quickly or can that be done? Because that's certainly not, maybe other members who were involved in that conversation, that's certainly not what the spirit of those regulations were to be.
I think there's some issue in relation to, it may be in regards to the legislation that governs special schools, because special schools go up to 19. So, and they will be governed by the Department of Education, I would assume. So if we could agree, we should write to the Department of Education via the Education Committee, if we're agreed. And also copy, because what I'd also suggested is request more detailed report on the responses on the targeted consultation on the regulations to assist our consideration of the post-statutory rule, and that would cover a number of those issues, Rachel. So we'd write back to the department if we're agreed. Agreed?
Chair,
yes.
If you're happy enough, we'll write back initially to the Department of Justice to ask for the more detailed information and include Rachel's question in it, and then depending on the answer,
we could write to
or
Education.
we'll ask them, if necessary, to liaise with the Department of Education, provide us with the answer.
Okay, you happy enough, members, with that? Thank you. That brings us to item agenda 10, is an SL1. We just love these at the Justice Committee. The County Court Amendments number 2 Rules, Northern Ireland 2022. Also item 11, SL1, the Magistrates Courts Licensing Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland 2022. And we'll take these two items together. You'll find the relevant information at pages 179 to 206 of our papers. Department of Justice is proposing to make the 2 statutory rules, which will be subject to the negative resolution procedure under Article 47 of the County Courts Northern Ireland Order 1980 and Article 13 of the Magistrates Court Northern Ireland Order 1981. The proposed rules will amend the County Court Rules 1981, the Magistrates Courts Licensing Rules Northern Ireland 1997, and the Magistrates Courts Registration of Clubs Rules Northern Ireland 1997. As a consequence of the amendments to the Licensing Northern Ireland Order 96 and the Registration of Clubs Northern Ireland Order 96 made by the Licensing and Registration of Clubs Amendment Act Northern Ireland 2021. These rules prescribe the forms to be used and the information to be provided with an application. The Department has indicated that a number of consequential technical amendments to the rules are required as a result of the 2021 Licensing and Registration of Clubs Act. Provision was also to be made in the proposed statutory rules for consequential amendments relating to Section 11 of the Act, which makes a new provision to allow a local producer to apply to a court for an order to specify any part of the premises as suitable for the sale and consumption of intoxicating liquor produced on the premises. However, a procedural issue in respect of Section 11 was identified, which has meant that this provision cannot be commenced at this time. And it's to seek the views of the committee if we are content with the proposal of the 2 statutory rules, or whether you wish to submit any views or comments to require any further information or clarification. Rachel?
Thank you, Chair. This is bringing back some memories for me, raising a number of issues about procedures in relation to these regulations. I am just wondering, how the department are communicating these issues with those involved in this particular procedural aspect of Section 11 that won't be commenced in April, and how quickly then this will happen in terms of amending the legislation. And if it is something to do with the primary legislation, is that going to happen then next mandate, whenever that would be? Because these are the issues that are going to affect people's ability to apply for licences. So it's just one of those. Is there any work being done to fix this?
Yep. Okay. Agreed that we'll write to the department. Okay. Gemma, have you a question? No. Okay. Thank you. Okay, members, thank you for that. That brings us to item agenda 12, the Magistrates Court registration of clubs. Amendment Rules Northern Ireland 2020, pages 208 to 213. And the Magistrates Court's Rules Committee proposes to make a statute rule subject to the negative resolution procedure under Article 13 of the Magistrates Court Northern Ireland Order 1981. The statute rule will amend the Magistrates Court's registration of clubs rules Northern Ireland 97, which prescribe the forms to be used in connection with the applications to a Magistrates Court under the registration of clubs Northern Ireland Order 96. And the information to be provided with the application amendments are required to the 97 rules and to some forms consequential to the Licensing and Registration of Clubs Amendment Act Northern Ireland 21 provisions in relation to the removal of the requirement that a registered club must hold a children's certificate. Conditions remain to allow young people under the age of 18 years of age in the bar. And are members content with the proposal of the statute rule, or is there any other further information that we require? Content? Thank you. SL1, item 13, transfer of functions appeal service, pages 215 to 239. The committee has considered information from the Department of Justice on the proposed transfer of the appeal service and rent assessment panel from the Department of Communities to the Department of Justice, and agreed at a meeting on the 14th of October that it was content with the proposal, which would be taken forward by a transfer of functions order made by the First and Deputy First Ministers. The Committee of the Executive Office is now considering the SL1 for the transfer of functions order to give effect to the transfer. As it impacts on the remit of the Department of Justice, the Committee for the Executive Office has written to ask that if this committee is content with the proposal for the statutory rule, and it's just to seek your approval that we are content with the proposal for the statutory rule, or whether there's any further clarification or information we need. We previously agreed it and said we were content, so agreed. Thank you. Item agenda 14, the Market Surveillance Northern Ireland Consequential Amendments Regulations 22, pages 241 to 246. The committee had previously noted the information provided by the Department of Justice on the Market Surveillance Northern Ireland Regulations 21, which had been laid in draft on the 10th of June 21 by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and came into effect on the 16th of July 2021. The statutory instruments ensured that the EU Market Surveillance and Compliance of Products Regulations 2019/1020 could operate effectively in Northern Ireland. The Department has now advised that the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy intends to lay a further statutory instrument to make a number of consequential amendments not included in the 21 regulations, and the Minister has received a request from the UK Government to agree to the making of it. She has acknowledged the request and advised the executive agreement is required before she can provide agreement to the relevant aspects of the request. And this is for members to note the position unless there's any further information or clarification required. Item 15, Court Rules in Northern Ireland to the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act Northern Ireland 21, and that is an update, and you'll find the relevant information at pages 248 to 264. In our meeting on the 16th of September, the committee agreed that it was content with the proposal for a statutory rule to make the amendments to the court or the Crown Court and Magistrates Courts relating to the new domestic abuse offence or any other offence aggravated by domestic abuse created in the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act Northern Ireland 21. The Department considered that there was merit in having court rules to make it clear that the nature of the personal connection should be stated in any notice served by the prosecutor under Section 6 or 19, and that in respect of a challenge, the defence should reply by a prescribed format. The Department is now advised that the Lady Chief Justice's Office has queried the vires of the proposed amendments and raised whether the notices are in fact matters for parties to the proceedings to settle in preparation for court proceedings rather than relating to the practice and procedures of the court, which is what the Magistrate and Crown Court's rules are in place to regulate. So, having sought further advice from the Departmental Solicitor's Office who concurred with the view of the Lady Chief Justice's Office, the Department has decided not to progress the Court Rules amendments any further and is satisfied that the primary legislation clearly states when and how a connection notice may be served by the prosecutor. If the PPS considers it necessary to ensure that the notice regime operates effectively, consideration can be given to supplementing the legislation in a future miscellaneous provisions bill in the next mandate. It's for members to note unless there's any particular query or clarification required. Agenda item 16, the Department of Justice Spring Supplementary Estimates Memorandum. You'll find that at pages 266 to 272. The Department of Finance has created a new estimates memoranda to accompany the spring supplementary estimates that I'm sure we all read and we all really enjoy getting it in our pigeonholes, that document that as Finance Minister I love to see coming. The purpose is to provide a greater understanding of the information contained in the relevant supplementary estimates by explaining the funding which is being sought, reasons for the changes being between the main and the supplementary estimates, and other pieces of key information. This is intended to increase transparency and assist committees and Assembly in our scrutiny role. The Department of Justice has provided the memoranda covering 21-22 spring supplementary estimates for the Department and for the Northern Ireland Judicial Pension Scheme, and unless there's any other queries or questions, it's just for members to note, to read, and I trust understand. But it is welcome, and I think that there's information in there that will give us a bit more understanding of the processes that we have to go through in relation to the spring supplements. Agenda item 17, the Problem Solving Justice Update. And you'll find that at pages 274 to 229. In October of last year, or 2020, the Department provided the Committee with a copy of its 5-year Problem Solving Justice Strategy Plan, which had been developed to facilitate discussions regarding the rollout of those initiatives shown to be effective and to determine their costs. The Department has now provided an update on each of the initiatives contained in the plan and has highlighted that the full rollout of these forecasts to cost somewhere in the region of 6.3 million by 24-25. The Department has indicated that this will be a challenge in the context of the reducing budgets, and the position will be reviewed once budgets have been agreed. And it's for members to note unless there's any questions or any further information required. Agenda item 18, court approval for minor settlements, the summary of consultation responses. You'll find that at pages 301 to 380. At our meeting on the 1st of July 2021, we considered the information provided by the Department on the proposed public consultation on whether and if so how it ought to legislate to require court approval of compensation settlements to children for personal injury minor settlements in cases in which legal proceedings had not been issued. The committee agreed that it was content for the consultation to take place and to consider the outcome and the proposed way forward when available. The Department has provided a summary of the responses to the consultation and outlined that almost all of the responses said that government should legislate to compel court approval of compensation in cases in which legal proceedings have not been issued. The Department intends to publish the summary of responses. And the primary legislation is required to change the current position, and this is not possible before the end of this current mandate. Therefore, while the Minister supports legislation in this area, any decisions will be for the next mandate and the next Minister. And just for members to note. Agenda item 19.
Marvin.
Sorry.
Rachel did have her.
Sorry, Rachel, had you your hand up in relation to that issue?
I did. Sorry, it was also the previous one, but it's absolutely fine. No, just in relation, I totally understand the Minister saying it would be for the next mandate and another Minister to decide, but is the Department, given there was a very significant preferred option, is the Department looking to do any preparatory work on this from now until then?
Okay. And do you want to raise anything in relation to the problem solving justice update?
Loads, Chair, but it's just there just seems to be quite a lot of pilots and a lot of evaluations, and I remember this from last year as well, where we discussed lots of pilots and evaluations, and also the year before. I'm just wondering when does it stop being pilot to be evaluated? So the likes of the substance misuse court, we've already touched upon that today. It doesn't say in the report about when the evaluation is being finished. It concluded a year ago, nearly a year ago. When's the further phase? What is it? I mean, how many more evaluations do we need? And I suppose then the domestic abuse behavioural change programme said that Belfast was the lowest. I would certainly be interested to know why and if there is any particular reason. And then again, the domestic abuse behavioural change programme court-based pilot, it said that lessons had been learnt, but didn't explain what those lessons were and what was happening then with after that. So apologies, quite a lot there. I'm more than happy to email Christine over, but I think there's a bit of detail lacking on that one.
Okay, no, thank you. And I think we would be happy to forward that to the Minister for further information. So thank you for that. That brings us to item 19, correspondence. There are 5 items of correspondence at pages 382 to 419. And unless any member has any particular issue, are we content to notice the actions of the sheet in relation to the correspondence set out in the cover letter? Agreed? Okay, that brings us then to item 20, the Chair's business. You'll be glad to know there's currently no Chair's business. Any other business member wants to raise? Nobody has indicated anything to me. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, could I just advise the committee that the Damages Return on Investment Bill has received royal assent and became law on the 2nd of February?
Yes.
Just for information.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm sure we're all delighted that that's the case, and you can think of all the hours that was spent on that piece of legislation, but it's always good whenever a piece of legislation comes through the Assembly and it receives the royal assent. So that became law on the 2nd of February, and thank you to all who were involved and a lot of work that was put into that. Members, that brings us to the conclusion. Just to remind ourselves that the next Justice Committee meeting will take place on Thursday the 10th of February at 2 p.m. and it will be in the Senate chamber. And thank you for your attendance, thanks for your help and your assistance to get through today's business. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room